From WBAY TV, your first alert station, Action 2 News at 4:30 starts now.
The history of this era is written. Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger.
One year later, Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here at 4:30. Today we're looking back on the past year and some of the Wisconsin connections to the war in Ukraine. But first, let's recap what's taken place since that initial Russian attack. By April, resilient Ukrainian forces had forced Russian troops to retreat from the outskirts of the capital city of Kyiv. Their withdrawal revealing evidence of war crimes, including those mass graves in the city of Bucha. The following month, Ukrainian fighters finally surrender in the key port city of Mariupol, where their resistance from within that steel mill was a defining image of Ukrainian tenacity. Moving ahead to September, Ukraine's military, with more support from the U.S. and Western allies, launching a massive counteroffensive, reclaiming large parts of territory that Russian forces had claimed in the east. Now, that forced Russia to change tactics in October, and they began large-scale attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure ahead of the cold winter. Remember, Russia also illegally annexing 4 regions of Ukraine. Today, as the country marks the one-year anniversary of the fighting, Ukraine braces for a new offensive from Russia. That means more aid will be needed, including medical. Doctors and materials have poured into the country from all around the world, including from the longest-running nonprofit supporting Ukraine here in our state, Chalice of Mercy, based in Chippewa Falls. And we are joined now by Valentina Pavzukova. She is the founder of Chalice of Mercy. So, Valentina, what do you remember from 1 year ago, whether it was your emotions, how hard it was to reach family and friends back there?
Yes, it was very late night for me. I was preparing my calendar for the upcoming year of events and missions. So usually I'm very booked. I don't have a spare weekend, let's say, or everything is occupied by the mission work. So, and finally we were excited because we can restart many things that we couldn't during the COVID time. So, and then I have received this horrible news that first missiles have hit Kyiv, and I have many friends who live there. So it was just absolutely, let's say, pierced my heart. And I had 2 choices, either to just go in devastation or basically to begin completely rewire entire mission work towards helping right now immediately my country and my people who are suffering, begin to suffer horribly already since the day one.
Okay, so you mentioned rewire. You began this Chalice of Mercy in 2007. So what does rewiring mean in terms of how things have changed for what you are doing for your fundraising, your medical aid efforts?
Yes, so for many years, particularly since 2011, I have been working with Ukrainian doctors, primarily OBGYN doctors. I was organizing many medical missions because now the war, which started a year ago, is only, let's say, it is a full invasion, right? But the war actually started 9 years ago in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So for many years, Chalice of Mercy with my team, we were taking care of people who lived in the previous war zone. It was called a gray zone at that time. Obviously, when the full invasion of Russia happened on February 24th, we needed to organize different ways of shipping medical, surgical supplies, medical, tactical supplies as well, and clothing, food, everything, because all of a sudden it became to be emergency aid. And I begin to seek for every possible avenue, first of all, finding supplies, and then finding the ways how we're going to ship this really quick and how it's going to get to the front line. So it was a lot of preparation needed to be happening and establishing a warehouse, which we place renting in Zaporizhia. That's the city I'm from. I'm originally from Zaporizhia. So, but I live here in America for 21 years. But exactly as you mentioned, since 2007, Chalice of Mercy, when the mission began, it was completely focused on helping my people in Ukraine. So last 15 years of my 21 year in America was just this particularly desire in my heart, really deep, to help my people in every possible way I could. And primarily it was medical care.
Well, you have an upcoming trip in the near future where you'll be bringing more medical supplies, medical care to the region, working with people there, especially displaced people from Mariupol, from what I understand. You made your home in Wisconsin. You've been here since you started Chalice of Mercy. I'm curious, what have you found Wisconsinites' response to be to this crisis?
Yes, so again, as I have mentioned, I begin to finding all of the necessary contacts, and first I was reaching out to the La Crosse diocese, to the Bishop of La Crosse diocese, the diocese that I belong to, and Catholic churches participate. They were my first shoulders, my first hands. And very first 2 weeks, we organized about 74 pallets of emergency aid supplies, starting from food, clothing, and medical supplies. And we shipped that, and then it never really stopped. So people in Wisconsin have been so generous. I mean, every single day there's somebody reaching out, and we received donations. We received such a generosity of people, just amazed me. And they care for people, just suffering people in Ukraine from very unjust and brutal war, full invasion. And so since that time, we have actually shipped, if we were to purchase, we didn't purchase these items. Most all items we didn't purchase, they were donated. But if we are to purchase, it would be a value of $25 million. Imagine. So that's how generosity of people in Wisconsin, in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, particular organizations like Matter International and MAP International, Mayo Clinic, they immediately were first to respond to my request and providing me the most quality medical supplies and medical equipment that I needed.
Well, Chalice of Mercy is just one of many Wisconsin organizations helping during this crisis, including the Little Candle Company, that could and still does. Up next, we'll visit with them about their fundraiser that is still going strong.
Her goal initially was to just sell 300 candles to raise awareness, but we are well over 3,000 as of this morning.
Well, that morning came 4 days after Russia invaded Ukraine. A year later, Door County Candle's idea to raise awareness has raised so much more than that. And we're joined by a familiar face, Christiana Trapani from Door County Candle. So let's just get right to it. What's the number at now for the amount of money you've raised with the sale of the Ukraine candles?
We are at a little over $868,000 raised for Razum for Ukraine with our Ukraine candle.
That's amazing. You're almost at $1 million there. So do you think, if you go back to 1 year ago when this started, not the candle, but the war itself, did you think a year later we'd still be talking, one, about the war, and did you think that you'd still be going with your fundraiser once you began?
I didn't think I thought the war would have been over by now. Sadly, I thought that would have been definitely over by now. But the Ukraine candle quickly I realized when the war broke out that there was still going to be a country that needed to be rebuilt. So I already knew in my head that, well, this Ukraine candle, we are going to continue fundraising for the country. But unfortunately, I thought the war would have been over by now.
So the candle, and for those who don't remember, you added on the second candle, the tin candles, to actually send physically to Ukraine because they were the only source of light. We haven't spoken to you since then. What was the response to that? I know you sold a lot, but did you get any feedback once they arrived in Ukraine?
Yeah, so we have over 10,000 that we shipped, and I'm in constant communication with Razom. They shipped them earlier this year, and so I haven't heard from specific people yet, but everyone at Razom in the warehouse has just been saying that it's huge. It's obviously like a life-changing candle. So I can't wait to see some pictures at some point of people using them, or at least hear stories firsthand.
Do you still hear firsthand things from family, friends, connections that you have in the country about your efforts raising all this money?
Yeah, I still, luckily, I still speak with my aunt, and she still gives me updates on how they're doing. And it's always, unfortunately, it's still always bad, and it's still, the bombs are closer and they're afraid to leave. So I always send her updates about the candles and what we're doing. And she always just says, this is the most that anyone can do. And she always just constantly thanks me and thanks everyone who's supporting it here. So it's really, hearing that just keeps motivating me.
I'm curious, we know that orders have come in from all over the country. Obviously, you guys received national attention for your efforts when this started. But what has Wisconsin, what part does Wisconsin play in this? Is it generosity? Is it the volunteers? I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, Wisconsin plays a huge part of it. I get so like emotional thinking about like the first few days of launching this fundraiser and how people just from the community near and far just walked in and we're like, all right, we're here. How can we help? What can we do? Do you need dinner? Do you need lunch? Do your volunteers need to be fed? And I mean, the community here near and far in Wisconsin have just shown like the most biggest hearts, the kindest gestures, and just sincerely wanting to help and sincerely wanting to make a difference. And without the people in this community near and far who have come from Green Bay or right next door or from Milwaukee or Madison, we could not have done this. It wouldn't have been possible, and we wouldn't have been able to raise as much as we did. And truly just Wisconsin and the people here have been a huge part of all of this.
Well, in Russia, President Putin meeting with the Chinese delegation as Beijing has called for a ceasefire and peace talks. Ukraine would like to see more details. This comes as the U.S. announced more military aid for Ukraine today, and amidst fears that China will offer aid to Russia if their peace overtures are unsuccessful. Welcome back. This scene playing out 4 days before Christmas on Capitol Hill. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky addressing Congress, and in a rare show of unity on the Hill, Zelensky receiving a standing ovation. Now, among those standing, Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher. I spoke with him earlier this week about the war and why it could have an impact in the Far East. So on this one-year anniversary, as you look back on the last year, has anything surprised you in this conflict?
Well, I think most analysts were expecting Russia to be far more competent and successful than they have been. I think it goes to show a few things. One is just the willpower of the Ukrainian people and the bravery and their willingness to fight, and also just some enduring truths about warfare. We think technology is going to fundamentally transform warfare, but there's some truths that remain. Just the need to do logistics, the need to have decentralized command, and the need to have a healthy supply of munitions. And so I think we need to learn those lessons and then apply them to other parts of the world, specifically Asia and Taiwan, to prevent a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Right, I want to get to that. I want to get to support, sure. Because there's obviously new support was pledged this week. But let's first start with what was your opinion of the president's visit? What did you think of that? I'm glad he went. I think it sends a strong signal to our allies. Now, there's some criticism that the president also needs to go to the southern border, which I agree with, by the way. The fact that he hasn't prioritized the southern border is
doesn't make any sense to me. What we need to do in order to make the case for continued support to Ukraine is to ensure that certain European allies, the Germans in particular, are stepping up and matching our contributions. They've made a lot of promises. They haven't followed through on those promises. That's frustrating for a lot of Americans. That's frustrating for me. We can't be alone in this effort. We got other European allies on the frontline states of NATO that have been phenomenal. Poland has been phenomenal. Yeah. And then the other thing is to use this in order to reform how we purchase certain weapon systems and start stockpiling munitions, because we're learning, the first few months of Ukraine, we burned through 7 years worth of javelins, and we're going to need those for our own stockpiles, and we're going to need those for other parts of the world.
$500 million pledged more in military support with systems and things like that from the president this week. Is there a bridge too far for you when it comes to support, and what types of support we should be giving to the Ukrainians?
Well, I think if we see a reduction in allied contribution, that should be a cause for pause. If we feel like our partners on the ground aren't using what we're giving them, and it isn't a part of a coherent, successful military effort, that's a cause for pause. But right now, we've actually seen the Ukrainians being phenomenally successful on the ground and being really creative with the use of certain weapon systems. We found a way to MacGyver certain Harpoon missile systems, for example. So we're learning a lot of things from the innovations that the Ukrainians are doing on the ground. So far, that's been a positive story.
All right. Oftentimes in this last year, you have tied the two together, China and what's happening in Ukraine. And last time we spoke with you, it was about your chairmanship of the House Select Committee on China. Is that been a tough sell for you, making that connection amongst your colleagues and other people that support what's happening in Ukraine but don't see the connection?
Initially, it was tough. I think there's a desire to separate these two theaters, or there's some desire to think, well, we can use Russia to balance against China. If it were possible, it would be a diplomatic masterstroke, but it's not possible because Russia is increasingly allied with China against us. And though these are strange bedfellows, their common interest in destroying the West and undermining the United States is what is paramount. I just went to Taiwan for 4 days, and the message I got from Taiwanese leaders is that increasingly Vladimir Putin is Xi Jinping's junior partner in a Cold War they've launched against the West. If we allow deterrence to fail, or if we allow the effort to fail in Eastern Europe, then deterrence is also going to suffer when it comes to China's prospective invasion of Taiwan, which would be a massive conflict, unlike anything we've seen since World War II. So
based on what you just said, obviously you want Ukraine to persevere in this battle and beat back Russia. Do you think that's what's going to happen?
Well, so far, they've been very impressive. Now, here's what we tend to underestimate from a Western analyst perspective. For someone like Vladimir Putin, human life is cheap. And so he's willing to sacrifice a lot of his own people for the sake of realizing his ambition. That being said, the Ukrainians have been very impressive on the battlefield. So I think if their morale stays strong and they have the weapons they need to fight, I think at a minimum they can push the Russians back to a February 23rd line around the country. Retaking Crimea would be much more difficult, but at a minimum, I think that's something that's achievable on their end.
Wisconsin Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin giving us this statement, saying in part that the Ukrainian people have shown incredible resilience, grit, and bravery, and, quote, we must remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine, united with our allies to send a clear message to bullies like Putin across the globe. Also today, the U.S. sending another military aid package to Ukraine, $2 billion on top of the $500 million that President Biden pledged during his Monday visit to Kyiv. More artillery rounds, military drones, and funding for training of Ukrainian troops included in this latest package. And when we come back, you need to see some of the inspiring and lighter moments in Ukraine over this past year, including a record-breaking session by one artist.
Need to See, sponsored by Feldco, improving lives one home at a time.
While the war has brought many atrocities and tragedies, it also has brought some images and stories of hope. Several couples who served together in the military in Ukraine having battlefield weddings. And then last month, a Ukrainian tattoo artist breaking the world record for continuous tattooing. He inked people nonstop for 63 hours. Now that broke the previous record, which was held by a Russian. He also used it to raise money for a local military group. That's our report tonight on Action 2 News at 4:30. Thanks for joining us. Action 2 News at 5 starts right now.